All right, we'll call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Barb, are you able to take minutes?
Okay.
Barb?
Sorry, yes, I can do
Okay,
it.
beautiful.
I just can't see who else other than board members are in the room.
I see a community member, Dave Sharp. I
Okay.
saw Floyd, Patrick, and
And
Katrina.
Katrina's not in the conference room. She's on Zoom.
Nope, she's on Zoom. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So the first item is a discussion item. And it's, shall the MAUSD board adopt a resolution to influence the redistricting task force? And that task force was just announced, as far as I'm aware. The people who sit on the committee were just announced. So this request was made by Brad and Herb and Kristen to make sure this discussion happened before the August 1st deadline. And I shared some of the resources that they had shared with me for the board, and I also gave some other information from VASBO, our articles of agreement, and then some other ways to look at or frame the difference between a supervisory unit and a district. Because it seems like the task force main job is to redistrict, so form new boundaries for districts. So we can open the discussion because there isn't an action item at this time. It's just the discussion part. So whoever wants to start. Yes,
A point of order, should we have a opportunity for public comment?
we definitely should. And I think because it's a special meeting and because Dave is right here, we could do it now if the board felt so, or we could. Does the board feel like public comment right now?
Yeah,
Yep.
yes.
Beautiful. Okay, then yeah, we can go ahead with public comment.
So is that my invitation to speak?
That's your invitation, Dave.
So, I'm intrigued by the notion that, MAUSD could move forward, either on its own or in concert with others, hopefully in concert with others, to come up with its idea of what's best for our kids. There's gonna be a lot of talk, in the committee that's gonna set orders and in the newspaper, and pressures are gonna be brought to bear from a lot of different directions. From people who want it done, their way. I think this board and Addison County, tends to focus on the children, and isn't that what we're trying to accomplish? My notion about stuff when we're trying to do laws and changes is, what problems are we trying to solve? And of course, there's the tax problem that's been well publicized. I think there's also opportunities for children side of the equation, if you will. So what would be best for our children in Addison County going forward? I expressed the vision that I have to the House Committee on Education when I spoke there, and in other places. I would like to see an Addison County school district, actually several school districts in Addison County. One for grades 9 through 12. So then we have a school district that would have Hannaford, Middlebury, Virgins, and Bristol school districts. We could invite as options to join us, Lincoln, or maybe some towns to the south, Orwell or towns to the north, could include maybe CVU. But my focus is mostly on an Addison County school district. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One is that by separating out 9 through 12 in its own school district, we can protect the elementary schools and allow them, have MAUSD and Middlebury and Virginia school districts continue to exist. And their job would be pre-K through 8. And then 9 through 12 would be the responsibility of the consolidated county school district. The other thing that I find attractive to this idea is that I think one of the biggest educational problems that we have for kids in this state is the ability to access career and technical education. There is a barrier, a dollar barrier between academic or traditional high schools and technical centers. I saw this play out when I was teaching auto technology up in Essex. The academic high schools have an incentive to keep kids in their school because each kid that leaves takes $20,000, give or take, with them to the tech center, right? And that's, so you get 10 kids out of the Mount Aid district, that's $200,000. That's not chump change. And that might be an AP Calc class that you can't offer anymore because you have students going to the tech center. And that kind of disincentive for doing what's best for children is a huge problem, not just here, it's the problem statewide. And if this single school district would be the tech center, Mount Aid, Virgins, and Bristol high school students, 9 through 12 students, would be under one budget. And so there'd be no budgetary issues with students going to the tech center. I shouldn't say no budgetary issues because traditionally it's more expensive to run tech programs, but it wouldn't be the hardship it is now. And I believe we saw when I was teaching that traditional high schools would coach this. They want to keep their best and brightest, right? And they want to coach or counsel the problem students, the disruptive students, the students that are hard to handle, that are expensive to educate in their building, in their traditional high school, get them over to the tech center. And so I saw them in my classroom. Kids that couldn't spell, kids in juniors in high school that couldn't add 2-3 digit numbers. And so this tension, both monetary and cultural tension between tech centers and high schools is a huge disincentive. We cannot call somebody from India to come fix the plumbing in our homes. We need plumbers. We need electricians. We need construction people. We need cooks and people in culinary arts and nurses and almost all the trades. And so we ought to have a robust technical program in this state for at least maybe half of the kids that are in high school. Should be taking some courses, some technical center program. So that's my spiel. I encourage you to move forward with the resolution and to work in concert with other districts in the county and come up with a plan that you can say to the committee that's reforming borders, look, we have a great idea for our kids. Let's make that happen for us. Maybe that's applicable in other places in the state. Maybe not, but it works for Addison County.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. You're welcome.
Okay. So with that information and all the information that has already been shared, I don't know if Kristen or Brad or Herb feels particularly strongly in opening this session.
I don't have any particular, I'm interested in hearing what folks have to say about this. I like the way that we've divided up the discussion. You know, first saying, you know, do we want to do anything? You know, do we want to do something proactive to keep our values? Or are we, you know, willing to just let something happen to us? And that before we get into, you know, the technical stuff about a resolution and even, you know, particular options. I mean, we heard something from Dave, you know, there's some other options out there. The really important question, I think, is this question, you know, this discussion we're having now. Do we want to do anything? And I say that because in my mind, anyway, if we say, well, we're just gonna let things happen, I think we know, I'm pretty clear, you know, what's gonna happen. I've been in the legislature and, you know, there are lots of divisions, but it's pretty clear, you know, what's the governor and a lot of leaders over there really have a vision. And it would mean, this district would cease to exist. We'd be part of a much larger district, whether it's Addison County, whether it's part of Rutland District, Chittenden, you know, who knows? That would be up for, you know, this task force to decide. And there would be certain attributes, and they're also very strongly in favor of, you know, a real clear supervisory district. You know, something like what we do operationally now, but much, much bigger, as opposed to, you know, some sort of hybrid. I mean, I think Dave, for example, and I've been thinking about it too, about how you can incorporate, you know, our existing supervisory districts with, you know, some supervisory union features where we think that's appropriate. But we don't even have to really get into some specifics. It's really about, if we don't do anything, we know I'm pretty sure what's gonna happen. We're gonna be in a much larger district. We will not have the same sort of influence, control over our policies that we take very seriously, over our budgets that we take very seriously, because those are kind of our values, you know, as a community in terms of education. So it's an opportunity, if we decide, you know, let's be a little proactive about this, you know, what are our values? We can try to make some of those, we can try to make some choices ourselves. We can try to preserve community connections that I think are gonna be pretty attenuated in a much bigger district. And you know, we definitely would lose our right to vote around school closures. That would go away. You know, current law says, you know, and they're talking about having those go away and replaced by a charter of some sort.
When you're saying those are the articles of agreement,
I'm sorry?
you're saying the articles of agreement that exist would go away?
Yes.
And be replaced by a charter?
Yes, in fact, Peter Conlon, I listened in on his on a presentation. There's a couple of things. There's a task force and there's a commission. He's on the commission, and he made that real clear. You know, with a larger district, you know, really by, you know, inevitably, you know, those would go away and they'd be replaced by a charter. And under current law right now, a district can close a school really for any reason or no reason at all. You know, that's the way it would work.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe legal on this one. So if the state's gonna potentially do this, right? This charter where then we don't
Yeah.
get town votes to close the schools, then so signing this resolution or whatever as a board would trump that? Like, I guess I'm confused the order
Oh,
there.
yeah. So again, what I like about what we're doing here is that the question is, do we want to talk about options or not? If we say we want to talk about options, well, people, you know, the state folks will say, no way, right? But at least we have the opportunity to make our case of, you know, this is the way we would like to preserve our values. So, yeah.
So we could say, you know, do this resolution as Kristen, you sent it, right? But ultimately, 3-4 weeks from now, months from now, the state could be like, that was fun and cute, but you're actually gonna do this.
Absolutely.
Okay, I was just trying to make sure I understood,
Yeah, yeah.
what the goal was and I don't know that I understand it all, but at least that helps me, so thank you.
Yeah, and the other thing I like about how Aaron framed and Mike framed this is that, you know, you decide first, do we want to be proactive or not? If we decide we want something to say about it, we shouldn't box ourselves in, right? I would imagine that Aaron and Mike, you know, would want to reach out, talk to the other chairs, see what they feel. You know, talk to this task force, try to get a good relationship with them, that'd be good.
Yeah.
And talk to our community too, right? You know, I think we really need to have that sort of process to make it credible. So that, you know, I don't, Dave's idea is, I think, very intriguing. I can see other sort of possibilities, sort of hybrid situations where we keep our districts, our districts and you know, operate under a supervisory union. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, but this is really, I think, the first step. That's what I see. I talk too much.
No, I think, no, I agree with what Herb said was sort of corollary to that is, you know, I worry that if we are not proactive and don't at least make our voice heard. And again, I'm not suggesting there's any particular solution here. I don't know what the solution necessarily is. As Herb said, you know, Dave has an idea. There are other ideas out there that the rural schools program has put on the table. Maybe they're good for us, maybe they're not, but foreclosing our opportunity, you know, to be engaged in this undertaking, I worry that we would experience some buyer's remorse if we don't do it. And we'll feel, you know, because once this thing gets going, you know, based on my observations and, you know, in some of previous, you know, education reform initiatives in the state, once the train leaves the station, you know, you're done. I mean, now, we may or may not get what, you know, Brad Johnson might not get what he wants.
Yeah.
But that's not really the point. The point is that we try to have a, you know, a situation in which we hopefully would have a seat at the table at least.
Right, have our voices heard. We may not get what we want after,
Exactly,
but at least
exactly.
we're there to have our voices heard.
Exactly.
Yeah, I hear you.
Barbara?
Hi, I was just wondering, yeah, I heard everything that everybody had to say, and if we put something together, some sort of a plan, proposal, whatever, some ideas on paper, and got the community involved, how much influence would community voice have at the state level?
You mean in terms of future district, or just in terms of this process? This process, you mean, Barbara?
I think this is just the beginning. And
Right.
so I think it would be comprehensive. It would go across everything that's happening, forthcoming.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of envision the process, if we adopt this kind of resolution. Aaron and others and the board, you know, would maybe talk to some of the chairs, you know, say, what are you folks thinking? You know, what are some of the options? Maybe put together a few options. And once you have, you know, maybe a few options, you bring it back to your community and say, well, what do you folks think about this? And once you have some clarity, or at least a bit of clarity, it's summer, you know, it's tough, I'm sure, to, you know, to get people to talk about some of this stuff. But once you have a little bit of clarity, Barbara, then I think you can go to the task force saying, you know, this is how we'd like to have, this is what we'd like to see you endorse for us.
Okay, but so how valuable would community voice or community members accompanying the request to the task force, how would that be perceived? And is there any power in that? I guess I'm asking.
I think anytime a board goes to a state entity with something to say, I think when they have their community supporting them, I think that makes them much more credible,
Okay,
you know? So I don't think that the community and what they have to say would necessarily directly, influence the task force. But it puts a lot more cloud, if you will, or influence into what the board, and I hope, other boards in the county might have to say about it. We think that this is a good option or a couple of good options. And listen, we've talked to our community and they support us on this. So I think that would be very powerful.
okay.
And I think that there are layers to that, right? I think if one board had consensus around what it thought made sense for Addison County and that board's community was supportive of that board, that may go somewhere with this task force. If all boards in Addison County were on the same page and all of the communities that support those boards had sort of a unified voice for this task force, that probably goes much further in terms of influence. And then there are a lot of layers in between those two ends. If not a single board has consensus, then there are basically individual voices that may still be able to influence the process, but to a different level than even a whole board being on the same page. So there's a lot of layers to potential influence.
I agree, Frank. Yeah.
And I did reach out to the other board chairs and let them know that we were meeting today. And they're interested in hearing what we come up with because most of the other boards aren't meeting again until early August or the second week of August. So it's possible that whatever we decide to do tonight gets in the hands of those boards and they're thinking about it in a few weeks from now. So that, depending on what we come up with for tonight, might give us some leeway in gaining community voice as well.
Got a couple of hands up there.
Yeah,
Kathy.
I have a clarifying question. So in reviewing the draft resolution, it looks like that is in support of supervisory union. In reading H454, that I think that's what that act's called. It's talking about districts. So us recommending a supervisory, am I confused? Like, our supervisory
No.
option?
Yeah, you're not confused. Yep, that's definitely something that can be. So that was a resource that was shared with me and I didn't share it with the grand board for this reason, because I want any resolution we come up with to come up to be something we want to do, and not necessarily, pre-framed. But it was okay that it was shared. It's fine, but I'm just saying that that's an option, Kylie. That sort of keeps some of the autonomy that Dave was speaking to and that Brad and Urban Kristen have sort of spoken to in previous meetings, where we can, the smaller schools are kept, and that kind of thing. But, so yes, that is an option. It is a little confusing because it's maybe a backwards move, or right, we're sort of a previous move. We came from an SU, but definitely is something to consider as an option.
And just
But that's why I tried to share as many resources as we could about SU versus SDU.
And not only is it an option, there's specific language in 454 that requires this task force to bring. So the task force has to present not more than 3, I think is how it reads, options to the legislature for consideration. At least one has to include SU, at least one SU in its configuration. So there's actually a requirement.
And just to clarify a little bit more, Kylie, the resolution that we can get into resolution later, but it was crafted in a way not to focus on supervisory union as the only option. It was more a vehicle to say, that's on the table. There are other options on the table. It's a vehicle for the board to start a process of talking to people about what we want.
Okay, thank you. Because in truth, I read the beginning of that act and the language was district. So I was wondering if supervisory unions was discussed. So you guys answered my question. Thank you.
Go
Actually,
ahead, Kathy. Oh, sorry, Brad.
just add one point to what Herb just said. I think that the conversation that has emerged since the passage of 454 is really in a nascent stage. And so far it's been framed on, for better or for worse, it's really kind of been framed between supervisory unions and supervisory districts. So, and then as Dave kind of pointed out, there are other options. And so I think that at least the intent, at least of the draft resolution, was not to make any particular recommendation, but to get words on a piece of paper that would be useful for this kind of meeting. It was not intended, at least in my mind, I don't know, to say we have to have supervisory union. Yeah, so.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Aaron, I was just curious about you were meeting after we met in June. You were going to meet with the other board chairs. What was the feeling in that meeting and what was the outcome?
So everyone's pretty, on edge, but they didn't seem like they were moving meetings around to accommodate things or make a decision, but they are very curious and interested about what we're doing and interested in having an Addison County voice. I think the setup that Middlebury has compared to the setup that Virgins has compared to Lincoln, we're all very different. And we all have different struggles. And so finding one community voice that would suit or be well suited for all of us is tricky. I think we all recognize that, but we are all interested in what's best for our students in our district. And I think that's the rubbing part, is that it's all kind of siloed in what's best for each individual district instead of maybe all of Addison County. So we didn't really come up with a whole lot of actionable stuff other than our board pulled together a meeting for July and others are not. So I guess what the next step is for the board chairs is waiting for the next time we meet, which I asked to be pushed back past this meeting so that I would have more information about where our board was sitting and what we could do with that. So not a whole lot of actionable stuff. Meredith.
I also have a clarifying question about the resolution and some of the materials that were shared prior to this meeting. In both the resolution and some other materials, there were options shown about possible school closure. And it's mentioned directly in the resolution that MAUSD will honor its 2023 commitment not to close elementary schools absent an affirmative town vote. It was my understanding that we can't close schools without an affirmative town vote. Am I understanding that incorrectly?
Mary, that's the current situation. That piece was put in there to the resolution because if the state's vision, or at least a lot of those leaders over in Montpelier, their vision is, one big district, right? And if there's one big district, our articles of agreement would be abolished. And so that would take away the right to vote that we currently have, if that happened. So that's why we thought it was important to to flag that one as something that was important, for the board to consider, moving forward.
Thank you.
Probably worth acknowledging, theoretically, there's an option for newly formed district to include in its charter that the town where the school sits would have to vote. I think that's unlikely, but the potential exists, I guess.
Yeah, there are lots of things that could be done.
Yeah.
I'm voicing sort of my sense based on what I've heard folks over there in Montpelier.
Yep.
They don't like the right to vote. There are other options out there that have been talked about. I introduced a bill around, let's have a process, community voice, look at some standards, that kind of thing. That didn't go anywhere either. The most I've heard is, well, we might have an advisory council. And personally, I don't think that's the same. That doesn't have the same sort of weight that some other procedures or processes would have. So that's why Meredith, we wanted to flag that as an important issue going forward.
Thanks for
It's
clarifying.
it's also a flashpoint issue across the state when you start closing schools. And so to get back to Barbara's point, I mean, if all of a sudden, numerous small schools are going to be closed, that's going to have a political effect on, not only this task force, but also on, education in Vermont generally. And it's going to just make all of our lives much more complicated.
We can attest to that.
Right.
Well, there's a reason that didn't get touched with a 10-foot pole in this legislation. Like it's the hot button topic, in particular, elementary school. I think there's even layers within the school. I think elementary is most controversial, less so, 9-12.
Yeah, it is. It's an issue though. I wasn't able to get too much legislation passed in my first year, but the one piece that I was able to do was to get before this commission that's also meeting a requirement that they specifically take a look at making recommendations for a process to have community voice before a school is closed. So there'll be it's a live issue. And of course, we have.
But I'm sorry to cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
But I think we have to recognize, the reality here is we've talked about closing small schools. It's a reality that we've all got to come to grips with. We haven't come to grips with it. We keep kicking the can down the road. Nobody's willing to stand up and do anything about it. So now the state is recognizing that we're incapable of doing it, and they have built legislation that will take that authority away from local towns from saying, oh, no, you can't close our school. We've got to be realistic about it. That is one of the driving factors here.
Yeah, I agree, Kathy. The cost issues are huge. Cost issues are huge, both in our district and across the state. And I agree with you that I don't think people have really come to grips with some of the real cost drivers that are driving, health insurance, what sort of mandates there are from Montpelier. And yeah, facility size, I agree.
You got to start somewhere. If I was in Montpelier, you got to start somewhere. And unfortunately, education is the fastest road to move things along. And if you're able to say, you've got to address these other issues.
I agree. We need to address all of those issues. The issue around honoring our commitment is simply, it's in our articles right now. And the board met, a few years ago and reaffirmed that.
But there are articles which will be null and void under the state's legislation. So
yeah, well,
I think we'd be making, to be honestly, I really appreciate that you all got together and propose this, but I just think we're making promises we have no right to keep.
Just thinking, Mike, did you want to say you had your hand up?
I was just going to jump in real quick. Thanks, Aaron. I was sort of thinking about, strategically, how does this stand the best chance to make a real impact, right, for this commission? And I think Barb's mentioning of community, and then I think Patrick's framing around this idea that one board's voice will have a say, but if you could really get all of the boards around Addison County on the same page, that's going to have much more of an impact. And I wonder to what extent if we're really going to have an impact, we need to be proactive about showing that whatever structure we end up recommending or proposing, if we can get to that place, is a structure that's going to fit both for the students, but also financially, right? Which is, I guess, getting to what Kathy is talking about, right? On the one hand, I would feel uncomfortable saying, yes, let's just do a supervisory union, or yes, let's just do a school district, unless we have some sense of, and this is how we think as Addison County, we can make that structure work given the projected sort of financial constraints of a foundation formula that's in place. So, again, there's so many pieces to this, but I feel this conversation to kind of get a sense of where in our hearts do we feel makes the most sense in terms of what we think our commitments are, what we think are the best approaches for students, is a really good place to start. Then bringing that more broadly to other boards and seeing, is that where their hearts sit as well? And then that in of itself still isn't enough, because we have to probably go one step further and say, and not only does this seem like the right thing to do educationally, but here's how we think we could possibly make that work within the new financial constraints. Because I think if we can't check all of those things, at least if I were on that commission, I'd be really reluctant to listen to a recommendation that wasn't necessarily grounded in a plan for success, right? Why set up a new district for failure if that structure or that organization really just isn't suitable for the constraints that the rest of the legislation has imposed? So I think we want to try to figure out how we balance all of those, and I know that's a big ask.
And especially if you look at the current administration's dedication to tech centers. I mean, Dave Sharp and I have not always seen eye to eye on subject, but I think he's really aiming in the right direction here, that we've got to come together. And we've talked about it as a board, our concern about the dropping enrollment of Mount Abe students at the tech center. I think that that's a really prudent move to take a look at.
Yeah, the other thing, Mike, I agree with what you said in terms of maybe 3 or 4 steps down the road. With what we're doing tonight might just be the first step. But at the same time, I read just today that there is a set of recommendations for the August 1st committee to undertake the kinds of things that you're talking about, to make sure that whatever governance structure is recommended, it is fiscally responsible. So it's not just, so the burden wouldn't just be on us, say the 4 or 5 Addison County school boards, but rather, or districts, but rather also on the committee and maybe even the commission itself.
Fully. I'll just reply real quick here, which is just to say, I fully agree, Brad. I just would hate to be in a situation where we came up with a proposal, they did those sort of financial analyses in whatever format that they saw fit. And if they came to the conclusion that it wasn't effective, then our recommendation won't hold any water, right? So to the extent that we can preempt their conclusion, both in terms of what the right structure and that it might be financially viable, I think it avoids the situation, or the potential situation, where they come to a different conclusion about what is or isn't fiscally viable, thereby negating a potential solution that we've put forth.
Yeah,
but I agree that
maybe I'm totally naive, but I hope that the process, whether it's being done locally or at the state level, isn't totally stovepiped in that way. I'm probably naive.
The difficulty, I think, Mike, is that, they're meeting for the first time August 1st. I think they have a deadline of, I don't know, sometime in October.
15, I think is when
Yeah,
the report due.
They have very, very little time to work with, Mike. I don't think, unfortunately, there's gonna be a whole lot of depth that's gonna go into their inquiry. But yeah, so they're gonna be looking, I think, broad brush, Mike, and then they're going to, as they get into it more, I would hope that they get into, the financial analysis and stuff like that. And then all this is gonna be decided in the legislature, right? So then you'll have folks with a little more financial acumen whether it's, the state agencies or the legislature has a pretty good fiscal analytical group. But you put some things on the table and you try to look big picture, I think, right now in terms of what's feasible, Mike, in terms of the issues you were talking about. And then the rest of the process, you hope will get more detail and get you more comfortable about stuff. But you got to start. I think the point, Mike, in my point anyway, is we got to start. And if we don't start to try to work through some of this stuff, we'll be left behind.
And I think while all of the challenges we just discussed are very real, and they do have a very compressed timeline to do this, as if that's not enough weight already. Also remember that whether the legislature acts on redistricting or not, basically means whether all the rest of 454 gets implemented or not. Like all of 454 basically is riding on whether or not redistricting takes place.
And whether or not it takes place, I think, Patrick, tell me what your thought is here, but whether or not the legislature approves redistricting is going to be a pretty political issue.
Hugely political, sure.
And so here's my glass half full kind of outlook on it. They're going to be, the commission, I think the task force is going to be dying to hear somebody step forward and say, yeah, we like something.
Please do this to us.
Yeah. So I would think they'd welcome this kind, you are using this kind of process, Mike, to offer them something.
In this
Go ahead,
discussion,
Meredith. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
oh, I'm feeling a little unclear on what we as a board would want to offer the task force at this point.
Here's the way I see it, but I think it'll be, Mike and Aaron might, it's really kind of sort of empowering Mike and Aaron to, in the first instance, talk to the other board chairs and vice chairs and say, we think we should try to shape this. So that might be the first step, Meredith. And at some point, sooner or later, try to develop a couple of options, 2 or 3 options that they can bounce off with their colleagues and with us, and try to settle on something that you can, then bring to the task force. Is that what you're getting at, Meredith?
I think so. That's helpful.
I guess my question is kind of the same as Meredith's. How do we make a recommendation without doing what Mike suggested, really looking at some figures and providing supporting figures or evidence on why we, right? Like if we haven't gone through that process ourselves, how can we feel confident in what we are recommending?
So I don't want to suggest, Aaron and Mike, I think are gonna, if I were in their shoes, I would, if this a resolution like this passes, I would start thinking about fleshing out, a couple of options. And put it in sort of conceptual form with as much detail as you can. Maybe you sort of put down on paper something that Dave suggested. Maybe you, you don't want to do that. Maybe another option might be, keep our districts, right? And have them responsible for the high schools and the elementary school. That's another option. But put them down on paper, so you can start thinking about them, and you can start talking to the other chairs and vice chairs about it, and bring it back to the board, and see if there are some that we want to go with. And then you bring it to the task force and say, hey, why don't you think about this?
I've been reading through this bill a couple times. Is there any mention, did I miss any mention of having school choice? Because I look at the kiddos in Stocksboro and you're equidistant to Heinsberg and Bristol. It would be ideal if border towns like that could have choice. And I think that that's really important.
I hear Kathy, I'm thinking of our trailer park folks, over in, if they're so close to Mount Mansfield, they're much closer to Mount Mansfield, I think. Frankly,
Exactly.
Kathy, I don't think that is in the cards, but
There's currently high school choice legislation for grades 9, 12, and I'm not hearing that legislation going away, so presumably that would stay intact even if the redistricting happens. I think the only other conversation I heard over the course of the session around choice was within district,
yeah.
not across district for
that's what-
K-8.
Kathy, what Patrick says is sort of the way I look at it too. I mean, what's realistic maybe is something within the district. But the type of thing that you're talking about, Kathy, there are some folks in Montpelier who would not like to see that idea.
Probably a
so
number
I
of
don't wanna
them.
say- I don't want to say, never or anything like that. We're just trying to, I want to give you a picture of what the landscape is.
I've been thinking about the situation, and if we were to look at turning Mount Abraham into a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and then Virgins and Mount Abe going to Middlebury for high school, we could then combine Beaman with Moncton, and Starksboro kids should have the choice of Bristol or CVU. That's an idea that's been percolating, but we'd have to have buy-in from CVU for that.
Yep.
So that would, and
And the law
CVU is big enough to have its own district. So
And Patrick just chimed in, and the law would have to allow it. Because right now, I think the law does not allow, say, Starksboro to tuition our kids to CVU, for example.
Again, CVU is probably a bad choice because that's specifically grades 9, 12 at CVU high school, which we do have high school choice for.
Right.
It's a lottery, it's not a guarantee.
right.
But Champlain Valley School District, like we don't have the option right now to transfer a student from Robinson to Heinsberg Community School in 4th grade.
But is that legally, Patrick, or if the two districts agree, could that be a part of the presentation that we make if we're looking at redistricting? I mean, CVU is going to be its own district. It's got enough kids. We know that.
The two districts, we would have to create, so it's not unlike what we're doing with Virgins at the high school level, because that's happening in addition to the high school choice legislation that we sort of agree to. What are the parameters we would put around that? And is there a monetary exchange or no monetary exchange? Is it a number of seats? Is it there's a lot to work through. And then frankly, there are just lots of logistics that make that complicated when you're crossing districts. And we're experiencing that now as we're getting into actually trying to get kids to register for our shared courses with Virgins right now. So there's an avenue, but it's very complicated. And then the question is like, we, as is Virgins, are struggling with declining enrollment and having sufficient student body to offer courses. I don't think Champlain Valley School District shares in that challenge that they're declining enrollment. So part of what makes it work with us and Virgins is we have a common interest, a common challenge that if we work together around, we can solve. When you have challenges that are less in common, it ends up being more beneficial to one than the other in the relationship, and that makes that even more tricky.
Yeah, you gotta have a common, there have to be things that, so for example, I think if Aaron is gonna talk to some of the chairs, say in Virgins and Middlebury. So what's in it for them, right? To do something in common. I think that one of the motivations is gonna be staring at a foundation formula in a couple of years that's going to lower our per pupil revenue. And Middlebury, I think, you know, is gonna have to reduce their budget, and, you know, by working together with us, they might be able to soften that blow. So they have some commonality of interest that might be productive.
That is definitely something that Addison County has in common, right? So that foundation formula looks to reduce, the numbers have been moving a little bit. 14 million is the number that has stuck in my head, is the loss of education spending in Addison County over what it is now. So that's impactful.
So Liz
Liz?
has her hand up.
Yep.
Just-
Yep.
I don't know if you see that, Erin.
They,
I do. I just called on her.
thank
Oh, I'm
you.
sorry.
We have, I mean, I kind of came ready to do like a SU versus SD comparison conversation, right? Like which is better. I think the choice question brings up the SD being ideal, because if it's a larger district and you're not worried about shifting money or shifting staff or shifting students, like just like the argument was made earlier for Hannaford, among a larger collection of schools, they there's more flexibility and choice in terms of that. And so I don't know if Starksboro, I don't know how it would work out, but from what I read and from what I saw, it would be under the authority of of the board of that district, just like we have that authority right now as a board to make our rules governing choice. So I didn't, I believe that would still be the case. There were some things about, mostly it seems like they talk about between private schools, which I feel like is a really small part of the choice discussion from my perspective. So, I don't know. So it was like, well, are 26 or 51% of the kids that attend that school, do they currently have public school? Are they tuitioned through public school, or are they privately paid for already? So that's like a whole nother, to me, not any of the issues that we've dealt with really as a board about whether or not a student wants to attend a Virgin school or a Mount Abe school, and the flexibility that would be ideal within that. And then 4 through 8,000, right? Like CVU could be combined with another district, I think. That I think they could. And cost drivers, healthcare, you only deal with that by, we're not gonna lower, like, we only deal with that by having less staff. And that's how you lower your healthcare costs. Our policies are mandated by the state in terms of a board that's over governing over a larger district versus us. So one thing that I've noticed between being here and being on Hannaford is we're looking at the same policies. We're looking at these mandated, and it's really not, we can make them further restrictive, but we can't make it less restrictive, right? Like the state passed a mandated rule, it is what it is, and we can further, like we did with each town will vote before school closure. Boards have the right to close the school, but we further restricted it with a town vote, right? So I'm not sure that that's really where we're connecting with our community on, and I don't know that our ends policies are all highly unique from each other. I think the foundation formula is going to, the best thing about it was that it, I know it's like the best thing about it, right? There's a great thing about it, and that is that we would know, I think, a month, like a whole year ahead of time, what our budget was going to be for the following year. Right now, we pass a like we hope for a budget, we get community input on their needs, and then we pass a budget, and then there's summertime and we're spending the budget. We're not going out and like really getting community engagement and advocacy in how we're spending our budget and dealing with the challenges together. The foundation formula will allow us to know whatever board it is, to allow them to know exactly how much they'll have in an entire year to talk about how you're going to not necessarily advocate to raise it, right? Like advocate to how to have it be a certain amount other than what it is, unless you want to mess around with the 5%, I think. And they, so I feel like the community engagement piece of budgeting is going to greatly increase with the foundation formula. There'll be a ton more opportunity to really talk about that together, and I think it'll shift the conversations. Community connections as well. And this is probably for the next board retreat, but Ripton, they are looking at a community center. They are looking at it being a senior center. They are looking at town services. There's childcare, there's community living like we have in Bristol. There are services for youth, services for a halfway house. I mean, you can, if you can think of it, if you know somebody who said, you know, even just, here's my little anecdote. In the store, there was a fellow and he was like, he had just missed, like he had said no thank you to his wife getting care at Porter, in that where they care for people and they kind of live there, right? And so they got bumped to the bottom of the waiting list. Her health declined greatly. And now he's at the bottom of a really long wait. There's some big community problems that our buildings can serve community connections in very needed ways. There is not a lack of need. And you know, the right to education, that's huge. And there's a ton of research, and it sounds like this AOE now has an extraordinary amount of data, even from spending last year, that broke down exactly whether you were run elementary schools and then you tuition out your high school students, and comparing the per pupil spending for all the different, I mean, they have a extreme amount of data currently available to help make these decisions. SU versus SD, I don't think that we have the control that I guess I've only ever been on this kind of a board. I don't feel that there's a huge amount of control I would be losing by not having a board for every group that there is a board for right now. The connection is through so many other ways. There's so many, like those advisory councils going in, talking to the principal, like volunteering on the PTO, going on field trips, working the after school program. Like those are huge things. And I just don't feel like as a school board member that there are things that we are doing that is that another group of folks wouldn't do just about the same thing we're doing. I don't know, there's so much, but the flexibility in staffing and to really be able to utilize what we have to offer. I mean, the merger study convinced me already that I don't want to be a separate supervisory union from Virgins. I want us under the same contract, right? I want us to be able to just run smooth and have options. So I strongly support districts, whatever size they may be, in the 4,000 to 8,000 range, centering around the career centers, perhaps. I don't have strong feelings beyond that, but I do think larger is better. And back to the choice, some people have said that it would expand choice tremendously, and other people have said it would stop it completely. So there's really not a clear answer, but I think that's because it will still lie in the hands of the board that governs that district.
Meredith?
Liz, I think that was really insightful and well researched, and I really appreciate your perspective. In this discussion and just in reading H454 in the Senate version of it several times, what I'm struggling with is, what do we as a board have control over, and what is the state going to do anyway? And knowing we've got such a quick turnaround, if we want to be proactive and make our recommendation, I want to make sure that it counts. So where can we enact the most beneficial recommendations for our community? And I see that being in our choice between school district and supervisory unit. If new districts are going to be drawn, how would we want them to be drawn in Addison County? If school closures are going to happen, how would we recommend they happen? Maybe even where would we recommend they happen? and our stance on school choice. And I think, to me, in reading the language of the bill, I think anything beyond that might be outside our locus of control.
Barb?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues at hand is the amount of districts that the state is recommending we have versus the ability to create smaller districts, but bigger districts than we currently have. I think that might be the first step. And I know there's a lot in the weeds that goes into that, but I think that is the first critical hurdle that we need to get over. And do we go in with just that one recommendation, assuming that we have other districts that want to come in with us? We could go in and say it's overwhelming the way it's being perceived at this point. This is our recommendation versus lots of minutia.
I agree, Barb.
Any other thoughts out there? Mike?
Yeah, I kind of like it at the very least trying to scaffold things that way, right? I think to Barb, to your point, I don't know if that's going to be particularly controversial. Maybe I'm naive in this, but to make an argument that yes, combining MAUSD, Addison Northwest, ACSD, Lincoln, and Career Center, we might be able to get by and large everybody on board with that. And I think regardless of what it means to combine those, even if we can lead with kind of a universal like agreement across those entities that that is the ideal size or structure, might be a really good recommendation starting point, right? And I think maybe, and stop me if I'm reading into what you're saying, but my read at least is that everything from there is going to get messy. It's probably going to get messy in terms of how individual members on this board see things and how members across boards see things. And we might be able to find consensus or at least partial consensus on some of those other elements. But if we can really highlight, like, this is the thing at its core that we're really confident on, and here's where maybe we're not so sure, just as probably the commission itself will not be fully sure one way or the other, but here's at least where it kind of falls, right? Here's where most see, or here's where a vote looks like. That might be a way that we can maybe have our cake and eat it too a little bit, like content in the surety of the big structure and at least giving an honest appraisal of where we broadly stand on the more complicated or challenging issues. I think there could be some value there.
Yeah, I think to that point, it's, goes back to what you were saying initially. Do we want to initiate a conversation or do we want to just? Okay. I think we need to engage with our, neighboring communities, present them with something with the understanding that, this is a starting point. This is a conversation piece. We want to know how the rest of you feel as districts and communities, and start there. Because if we don't have the conversation, if we don't start it, we don't know how everybody else is going to feel about it.
Yeah, I see this process, if we want to move forward with it, is really empowering our board through Aaron and Mike to talk to folks about these issues without any preconceived notions. See what they think. So it's really about empowering the board and our leaders in terms of reaching out to the other people that are involved.
So if I'm sort of understanding correctly, the feeling of the board right now is empower Mike and I to reach out to other boards to say, how would you feel about offering a redistricting that was Addison County and the Career Center as a starting point? Is that what we're,
Definitely a starting point, Aaron. I would hope that
did I
you
freeze or
would
did you
be,
freeze?
I'm sorry?
I think you all froze. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add in there, I think that is a good starting point from my perspective. I would like to see you authorized to actually explore the options though, under that drought starting point, Aaron.
Mhm.
So that you at least try to get a consensus, with the other districts about where they want to go. I think that would be even more productive, and that would be something I would support as well.
Yeah, I think, Aaron, the way you framed it sounded a little bit too much like a result or an actual kind of specific recommendation. I don't think that's what we're getting at here. I think the point is to engage in a conversation with the other districts as a starting point with the other districts, in Addison County. They might have totally different ideas. And I'm not even getting necessarily to whether it's a town district or a supervisory union or a unified district. Way the cart would be way before the horse to start talking in those terms.
Well,
But rather, I think our, opportunity, if not tonight or, I'd like to see it tonight, is to sort of get the ball rolling on this thing, take a leadership position. Erin has indicated that the other folks in Addison County with whom she's met, they have, they're interested in what we're doing. And so this is an opportunity for us to, again, to take a leadership position and initiate a process with no as Herb just said, with no preconceived, end game, but rather to ensure that, or at least help the task force and the execution of 454, that it proceeds in a way that, we have some say in it, or at least an opportunity to have some say in it.
I agree with you, Brad, that we do need to take a leadership role, but I don't think it's just an open discussions because all these folks met before and everybody, discussed their angst and their uncertainty about what's coming up. They're waiting for somebody to throw the spaghetti against the wall. And Aaron and Mike, you're the great people to do it. Just say, hey, what do you think about this? And if you don't like this particular, let's work together to come up with it. But somebody's got to start that discussion.
Right, I agree
and be that leader.
Yeah, I agree with that, 100%, Kathy.
I wonder if it might be helpful in this context, and it feels like we've already started to do this. I forget who kind of listed some of these key points, but not coming out with an outcome, but maybe if Aaron and I were equipped with a sense of kind of 2 or 3 of kind of our key principles as a board that we want to maintain, right? So again, not saying what structure will get them, but almost an ends policy for this process that we could use to help drive those conversations. Because I'd hate to go in with what I think is important or what Aaron thinks is important and not really reflect the board as a whole. So things I'm thinking about that have already been mentioned, right, are the question about school closure, right? Like if we as a board strongly felt that we need to honor our articles of agreement, and we think that any structure should exist in a way that requires an individual town vote for school closure. Like if that's something our board strongly feels, like it would be nice to know that, right? Or if a strong principle might be that whatever we do has to have like clear clear, cost constraints, given what we see with the foundational formula going forward. Like, kind of principles like that might be really, really useful, not to say we have to do it this way or this way, but we want to end up with a solution that is able to maintain successfully those core principles. And so I guess that's where I'm looking or asking the board as a whole, like, if that's useful, and if so, like, what do we think those core principles are?
Well, the core.
I would love to, sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
Go ahead, Meredith, go ahead.
I agree with that. And I think as we're drafting our core principles, this was stated in public comment at the beginning, and I'm assuming everybody would agree that I think our number one core principle is always going to be a high educational outcomes for our kids. What I had outlined before, I think it might be helpful to understand this board's stance on, or at least enable Mike and Aaron to talk to other boards to get their stances on supervisory union versus school district. H454 has very clear guidelines for how to close schools. So to have our stance on, number one, how do we feel about school closure? And if school closure is something that the state is going to have, that the state is going to force us to do anyway, how would we want that process to look to cause the least harm and angst in our communities? I think Kathy brought up an excellent point earlier about school choice. How do we feel about school choice? And I really don't see us having any authority to make much recommendation beyond that. So I think my takeaway from this discussion is that getting our community's input on those three things and talking to our neighbors about those three things will empower us to make the best possible recommendations to the task force.
Well, why don't we, wordsmith the resolution to reflect those values? That way you have something, I think,
Got something to start with.
I'd hate to leave this meeting where we're just sort of making this sort of general charge for Mike and Aaron to go out and save the world. I don't think that's very useful, but I think if we have something.
I appreciate that, by the way.
Yeah, right, so, but I think if we have something, written down, it might be useful. And I don't know what other people think, that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I understand what you're talking about,
A lot of the stuff is in.
there's. We circulated this draft resolution. And sort of embedded it in, I think, are some actual sort of values. In terms of, localized government, the extent to which we want some control or say around policies and budgets. I think that's a value. Certainly, I think we want to have, there are some issues going to come up around voting in a larger district, and smaller districts might get, sort of overwhelmed by, larger towns and stuff like that. That would be a value if we want to preserve, the ability of some of our smaller communities to have a say in things. Are you drafting?
I'm writing.
Brad's drafting something, I think, to take what we circulated and changing it a little bit to incorporate some of the values that we're talking about. Because I agree, I think it would be nice if we could leave this meeting with something concrete that Aaron and Mike can say, hey, we passed something, and these are kind of our broad framework of marching orders for what we should be doing.
I think those are great sentiments, Herb, but I also realize we've been here for an hour and 15 minutes already, and 13 people in a room wordsmithing a document, I don't think is a productive use of time. Is there a way that, Brad, if you're already working on it, or Aaron, Mike, you can draft a document and send it to us for input, and we can give you input? Rather than sitting here and trying to do this tonight, because I don't think it's gonna work.
Yeah, we probably need to meet and vote. I would think we'd want to meet and vote on that, Kathy. So that would be shoehorning it into the retreat or something.
Right.
Would it, I mean.
Or another special meeting.
We could, or just a quick special meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm open. It just sounds like, yeah, that's a good process, I think, Kathy. But then, you know, have to be a point at which we we get together again and actually vote on something, right?
Okay, so if we look at the schedule tonight, so Aaron and Mike, are you up to this? And Brad, it seems like you're really vested in this. And you have certainly the wherewithal to do it. Are the three of you willing to work on this together?
I guess I'm struggling a little bit to even, so
We have open meeting.
we have,
Open meeting problems.
I mean, even as the drafted resolution reads, like, I don't know how we move something forward in a meaningful way without tackling how do you feel about school closure, number one on this draft proposal? And what do you think about SU versus SD, number two on this? Like, how do you draft, like, how do you not have those conversations as a board to see where you land as a board to inform whatever resolution might get landed on?
Well,
And those are two weighty conversations, obviously.
And Patrick, sorry to interrupt. I would really, in order for me to feel comfortable voting yes for any recommendation we have to the task force, when we're talking about our priorities, I wouldn't feel comfortable voting yes without explicitly stating that our top priority is always going to be the safety, well-being, and academic excellence of our students. I think when we start talking about anything else, those are really big, really political topics. But I just want to make sure that that is what's being centered in whatever recommendations we're making. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just a couple of notes, you know, I may have missed something, but it seems to me that any kind of resolution we might vote on would be to support an effort to explore, you know, educational reform in Vermont that considers the following values. And one would be, high student performance at a cost that taxpayers can afford, an appropriate degree of local governance and local decision-making, consideration of, the efficiencies or efficacies of school choice and equities of that, budget transparency and accountability. Because, one of the things we haven't really talked about tonight is that the bigger you get, the less transparent things become and accountability gets less. And I think that has, would have to be part of the discussion. And then of course, closing schools. So I, 5 or 6 things here that kind of outline our values without saying it has to be a supervisory union, or it has to be a district, a unified district.
Can I throw out one other, something that I think of as a value, at least it's important to me, and that is this notion of connection with the community. I think is so important for students. I think it's important for teachers and folks that work with the students. I think it's really important in terms of getting support from voters. So that notion of maintaining a close connection between the district, the schools, students, parents, and community, I would highlight too as well. You got them?
Yeah, I did. Okay, so what I can do, and I think in order not to violate the open meeting rules, is that I can draft something and get it to Aaron. And then Aaron can take it from there, to get other input from other board members. Is that right, Patrick?
Yeah, that's fine. It's, you can't collaborate with
Right.
a quorum, on anything like that. So that certainly avoids any of that. But I think your point earlier about if we're talking about a resolution from this board that gets the official signature from the chair, there doesn't need to be a vote of the board
Yes,
on the
yeah.
resolution. So that is it is a motion of the board represented by the chair.
Right, I agree.
So that would mean a meeting at some point, whether it's a special meeting or it's an agenda item on a meeting that's already scheduled. We would just need to figure that out and it becomes a timing thing, but.
There might be something you could noodle on, Aaron, about how to bring that up again, you know, depending on the process you use to circulate what Brad's gonna, or, you know, what you do with what Brad's going to prepare.
And I'm looking back at Patrick, at what you were just saying about, would it be worth it to do a straw poll tonight to see how people feel about SD versus SU and on school closure? Then you'd
I
have
guess the
more to,
question
more to
would be,
go on.
Do folks feel like they're informed enough to even do a straw poll on that? That's where I wonder, like, what conversation might be needed to develop a common understanding about
Yeah.
the two options, you know, SU versus SD, and obviously within an SU, there are variations of an SU. But there you're gonna draw a line. It's either going to be an SU or an SD. It's not gonna be a hybrid of those two. It's one or the other. And talking about the ups and downs of the two feels like it's important in order for the board to be in a position to even straw poll. But I don't know to what extent that's
It
necessary.
doesn't serve the purpose, a purpose for what
Right,
I suggested we do.
right. I do
Go
think
ahead,
at
Barb.
some time that becomes really influential when we get to the point of advocating to the redistricting task force. Saying we want an SU or we want an SD becomes pretty important because my understanding is they're not gonna get into the weeds of how your SU is structured or necessarily if you have school choice in your SU or your SD, or like there are a lot of weeds that they're probably not gonna get into when they're looking at the whole state. And what combination of SUs and SDs around the state are we gonna land on? So.
Yeah. The only concern I have about framing it as a sort of either or kind of thing, Patrick, is that, you know, a supervised district is pretty clean. You have one district, and
Right.
Whereas when you talk about something else that incorporates some type of supervisory union, there are different options. And those options can include actual districts like we have now. You know, so it's not totally either or. Which is why I'm more comfortable, I think, with if we pass a resolution like I think we're talking about, having Aaron and Mike and with input from other folks. And with talking to the other chairs, sort of flesh out maybe 2 or 3 options, right? Put them on, who said, you know, putting the spaghetti against the wall kind of thing. And have that sort of discussion when you see, you know, what the option looks like, rather than having a vote SU or SD. I mean, you can decide whether, I suppose, you like or don't like an SD, one single SD. But I think it's gonna be difficult to make that choice without knowing what, you know, there might be a few options there.
And knowing what comes of the conversation with the other boards, you know, they may have ideas that we didn't think about, so. I think
Yeah.
leaving it open.
Go ahead, Barb.
I've worked in both SU unions and district. So, coming from that background, when I read the information, it was very clear, but I also felt like it was presented in a lens coming from one source. So I was wondering if, there's more information out there, someone else or something that we're missing that we're not seeing because it's being presented from the sources that are presenting it. Just a
That's a good
question.
point, Barbara. It's, I'm afraid, been a very fraught public discussion in Montpelier. So you tend to get these sort of, advocating for one or advocating for another. Which is why I think the process that we're talking about is better than, sort of a cheerleading, SD, let's go SD, let's go SU kind of thing. But exploring some different options. I don't, it's gonna be, I think you're absolutely right, Barbara. I think it's gonna be tough to find something truly neutral on the subject, I'm afraid.
I just want to say that I think in Erin's chair notes, the letter from VASBO and the letter from the Rural School Community Alliance had very different viewpoints, which I actually found really helpful to compare and contrast the pros and cons both of them outlined.
Yeah, thank you. I did notice that. I was hoping for something a little more neutral.
The rural organization came up with something today, which was just circulated. I just saw it. You sent it to me, I think.
Yeah, so I'm on
That's
their
the-
mailing list, so I get
That's
it.
something different from what was in the chair notes, and we can make that available.
Yeah, there's a little more detailed.
That's the document that lays out a proposed structure for how the task force might operate. Or recommendations for how the task force should undertake its charge.
So what is our goal here? I mean, I feel like we're just spinning around.
Yeah, so I think where we landed is that I think the conversation of SU and SD can be tackled at another time. I think it's more important now to get the draft of the resolution that Brad said he will amend and then send to me completed. And so the other thing on our agenda was an action item to adopt a resolution to influence the redistricting task force. So that doesn't sound like that's gonna happen. So we can just vote, either table that or vote it down today. So that would be the next step. And then once that draft is done, I will formulate a way to get feedback from everybody. And then once it seemed like we were confident in what we wanted to say, we'd do a special meeting, or if needed, put it on our retreat agenda somewhere so that we could start sharing that out other places.
So
Does that sound right?
have we just, do we have a census of or consensus on the board that we want to uphold the 2023 promise not to close schools, even though it's a moot point? Or are we taking that out? I mean, I don't think we've had that discussion as a board of how we feel.
No, but I think that's why redoing the draft is important, because then I can get feedback from everybody asynchronously. And start to hone in on that and then have another discussion about that, because there are so many bits and pieces. Right now, our articles of agreement say we have to do that. Right? And that's where it is. So we can continue to have conversations about that, but I think for right now, step one is getting that draft done.
I have some ideas of how that first, point in the draft resolution could be worded to, to respond to Kathy's, point.
And I
Yeah.
guess I would also just say,
Yep.
I think there's value already in us just identifying those key potential issues. So that way, when we do bring in other boards, we can say, look, these are the 3 or 4 things that we as a board haven't really fully come to terms with yet, but know have to be addressed as part of any kind of resolution that we want to move forward. And presumably that would then put all of those ideas at the front of their radar, their agenda, so that each of those boards could have those same conversations, right? And so that way, in parallel, each of us can kind of grapple with where we as individual boards fall on these really important topics, and hopefully then bring that back together and say, are there really significant areas of overlap that we can then move? So I think identifying the issues, even if we don't have a say of how we tilt one way or another as a board, is probably a really important step for this meeting.
Yeah.
I
And
agree,
historically,
Mike.
the other two districts haven't had an issue with closing schools. So they might find our grappling with it a little off-putting, but I could be wrong. So well, it is a big point to talk about, as they've done a lot in both districts, and our Middlebury is even working through the Shoreham and Bridport merger currently. So there's, they're doing a lot of that work that we just haven't dipped into, we've been hesitant to do. So sorry, Meredith, go ahead.
No, just I want to affirm what Mike was saying. And then in point one, I don't see anything wrong with stating that we're going to continue honoring our commitment from our articles of agreement, because we have to either way. And I also hope that there's I want us to be realistic in the sense that I'm getting from the bill that was passed is that schools are going to close. At which point my concern becomes what recommendations can we make to diminish the harm to our students and our communities? And I would love for something to be included in the resolution. Like, we'll talk with Addison Central, who's just gone through this and is going through this again, to understand what they're doing to minimize harm, and that whatever recommendation we make as a group will make sure that when school closures happen at the state level, that we're prepared, and that we are making we're making recommendations for policies that are going to be the least disruptive and harmful to our kids and communities. Is that reasonable?
All right.
So, Aaron?
Yep.
Aaron, I have a question. I sense that you were looking to move forward. So the first question you had on the agenda, Aaron, is shall the MAUSD board adopt a resolution to influence the redistricting task force? Are you looking for a motion to at least approve that? And then the resolution would happen later?
We don't need to vote on that.
Oh, we don't?
Yeah. We can, we can
discuss-
table that.
You don't need to, you don't want to vote on that? Okay.
So I'd move that we table this,
Yeah.
the resolution article.
Yeah.
The
Okay,
action.
so
Could you
the
read
action item.
for me, please? You're voting to,
Brad
recommending.
is moving to table the action item.
I second it,
Okay.
Kathy.
Kathy seconds.
Okay.
All those in favor of tabling the action item on the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
I
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we'll table the motion or the action. So Brad will share with me, I will share with you, and we will get working on refining an idea, and then I will be in touch with you about how we move forward with that. Okay,
Sounds good.
Sounds good, thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Kathy
second.
first. Sorry, who was that?
Meredith, second.
Meredith second. Thank you. All those in favor of adjourning at 7:34 p.m., please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much.